Good evening, everyone. Welcome once again to the Bhagavad-gita Satsang. I'm Hari-kirtana. It is a great pleasure for me to be here with you, and it is a great honor for me, for you, to be here with me. Thank you very much for choosing to spend your time with me. And if you would do me the favor of raising your hand just to let me know that you can hear the sound of my voice, and there you all are. Thank you very much for your cooperation. Our usual bit of housekeeping before we go on with the show. Just in case you find that my lips move, but you can't hear what I'm saying, you can adjust your audio settings up in the upper right-hand corner, as well as your viewing options. You need not worry about your microphone or video camera because you can see, and so far as I can tell, hear me, but I do not see or hear you. But you have the option to be heard by way of the Q&A box. So if one of you would be kind enough to type in a rhetorical question in the Q&A box, just so that I know that you can reach out to me and make your questions and comments known to me, I would appreciate that so much. Last week, in our explorations of the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad-gita, Krishna described some obstacles to success for someone on the path of mystic yoga, defined success. We got to look at what does success mean for someone who is on this path, and we received from some instructions for beginners, which from the standpoint of the standards being set by Krishna's description of the Ashtanga or 8-limbed system of yoga, it's probably all of us. So, nice to know what the entry point is. Tonight, we're going to look at a paradoxical proposition, the idea that there are actually two kinds of oneness. Sounds like a contradiction. However, there is a logical explanation for this idea of the two kinds of oneness. And we'll get to that in just a moment. We'll also look at characteristics of spiritual vision. Now, you may recall, we have already spoken about spiritual vision in chapter 5. In chapter 6, Krishna will make clear that the same kind of spiritual vision that is available for one on the path of karma yoga, action informed by transcendental knowledge, is also available for one on the path of Ashtanga-yoga. However, on the path of Ashtanga-yoga, there's some additional things to be seen as we progress up the yoga ladder from karma yoga to Ashtanga-yoga. So that's what's in store for everyone this evening. But first, let's take a quick look back at where we left off in our last class. We concluded with this verse, which is verse 26 from the 6th chapter. One must certainly withdraw the mind from wherever it wanders due to its flickering and unsteady nature and bring it back under the control of the self. So two quick things to look at here once again. The mind wanders, it flickers, and it's unsteady. Therefore, very challenging to bring the mind under the control of the self. And here's the second thing that we're going to take a quick look back at. Which self are we talking about? The word Atma is a very versatile word in Sanskrit. It can mean the self. It can mean the mind. It can mean the body. It can mean the supreme self. Depends on the context in which it's used. And in some cases, It could be understood to indicate both the individual self and the supreme self. When we speak about the Atma with the lowercase self, we know we're talking about the individual self. And this is the self proper. There's a whole other self, which is the illusory self, the self that is composed of the three qualities of material nature that we misidentify ourselves as being. And the word Atma is not usually used to identify this misidentified self. Atma generally refers to the self, consciousness proper. With an uppercase S, Atma indicates the universal self. And we're going to look at a few different interpretations of how the self with a capital S is referred to in terms of how one understands the Bhagavad-gita, by which I mean, which self are we? We know we're not the illusory self that is actually the qualities of material nature we identify with. We have some certainty about our status as individual spiritual beings. The question is, when we become self-realized, is that self-realized self actually the universal self? We've already established our eternal individuality, Arjuna's individuality, Krishna's, yours, mine. That was established in the second chapter, right off the bat in the 12th verse. Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings assembled here on the battlefield, nor in the future is there any possibility that any of us will ever cease to be. So we know, at least as far as Krishna is concerned, that we are eternally individuals. Now we also know that Ishvara is the object of meditation in Ashtanga-yoga. The verses we'll cover tonight deal with this directly, and we know from the Yoga Sutras that Ishvara, the supreme person, is Purusha Vishesha, a person, but an exceptional person, categorically different from all other persons, and the ultimate object of meditation that brings about the perfection of yoga in Patanjali's system. But where is Ishvara? If we want to meditate on Ishvara, then where do we look for Ishvara? Much later in the Bhagavad-gita, Krishna is going to reaffirm the position or the place of Ishvara. And here's the verse that pertains to our topic tonight. Ishvara sarva bhutanam hriddesher junakishtati. So Ishvara, the Supreme Lord, sarva bhutanam means of all living entities. So the Supreme Lord of all living entities. Hriddeshe. So deshe means field or location, realm, and hrid indicates the heart, hridaya. So hriddeshe means in the location or in the realm of the heart. Arjuna refers to Arjuna, to whom Krishna is speaking. Tishtati means resides. So what this means is the Lord of all beings resides within the realm of the heart of all beings. So that's where we can find Ishvara, in our own hearts and in the hearts of all others. But do we look for Ishvara with our eyes or with our ears? In Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, the recommended method for meditating on Ishvara is the repetition of the sound Om and its contemplation, and the contemplation of its meaning. as the sound incarnation of Ishvara. If we want to see Ishvara within our hearts and the hearts of all others, we begin by looking with our ears. Sound is actually the key to awakening one's transcendental vision. So here we have yet another paradox. So that's our quick look back with a little bit of foreshadowing as a bonus. And now we'll move into this week's verses. So I will read through all the verses, as is our usual habit. And then we'll go back and look at each verse individually and dig a little deeper. So we begin with verse 27 of the 6th chapter. A yogi whose mind is peaceful will surely achieve liberation by union with the Supreme and will thus attain the highest perfection of transcendental happiness. Situated beyond the influence of passion, one is thus freed from all reactions to past deeds. Text 28. By constant engagement in the practice of yoga, the self remains connected to the Supreme Self, becomes free from all material impurities, and easily attains infinite joy. Text 29. An adept yogi sees the Supreme Self within all beings and sees all beings within the Supreme Self. Indeed, one who is truly linked to the Supreme by the process of yoga sees the same Supreme Self everywhere. Text 30. For one who sees me everywhere and sees everything in me, I am never lost, nor are they ever lost to me. Text 31. One who is immersed in this experience of unity offers their love to me as the one who abides in all beings. Such a transcendentalist always lives within me, irrespective of any external circumstances. Text 32. O Arjuna, a perfect yogi is one who, in seeing the true equality of all beings, sees the happiness and distress of all beings as if it were their own. So this is a very nice idea that we can find the Supreme Being, the Supreme Person, within the hearts of all beings, within our own heart, and see everything within the one Supreme Being. I had a wonderful week last week. I had the opportunity to spend the entire week with a fabulous group of yogis and yoga teachers at a beautiful retreat out in the hills of West Virginia, and had the opportunity for the first time to have the Bhagavad-gita Satsang on location with a live audience, which was a lot of fun. If you look over my left shoulder, right there, you will see a very nice gift that I received that is now in a spot right alongside my collection of sacred literature from the group that I brought to this retreat. And one of the things that we did is we went on a walking meditation. We were in a place where there was lots of nature, basically. We were out in the hills of West Virginia. And it was an assignment, not just a nice walk, but I asked everyone to look for the Supreme Person in nature, to make a project of noting where one might find the Supreme Person if one goes for a walk in the woods. And it was a beautiful day and a beautiful opportunity to do just that. And it's kind of a psychedelic experience to move into that space of looking at everything and seeing it within the Supreme Person, and seeing that same Supreme Person within the heart of all beings. Every person who is walking on the trail, every clump of grass and tree and vine and bush and any little critters that we saw, all simultaneously within the Supreme Person, and yet that same Supreme Person was within them. And that Supreme Person that was within them contained everything. This is how I like to blow my own mind while going for a walk in the woods. All right, now let's look at these verses in detail. So we'll go back to our screen share. Because we're going to chant the first of our verses. So if you are new to the satsang, the way we do this is I chant one line, you chant that line back. The diacritical marks that indicate how the letters are pronounced are present here, and I'll give you a brief explanation. The accent mark over an S is a deep SH sound, pink noise instead of white noise, or instead of sh. The bar across the A indicates a long open sound, ah instead of The dot over an M or an N indicates closing both the lips together in front and the back of your mouth, the back of your tongue against the roof of your mouth at the same time. So shaping your mouth as if you were wrapping your mouth around a little walnut. Notice in the second line, the last word has two T's. In Sanskrit transliteration, you pronounce everything that you see. So rather than running the two T's together as in udamam, like the English word letter, you would actually hit the first T, slam on the brakes, and then proceed with the second T, uttamam. And for this one, oh yes, and in the first line, the Y on the third word, he, is going to run directly into enam. So instead of he enam, it'll be hienam. So here we go. I chant, you chant back. Prashanta manasam hyenam yoginam sukham uttamam upaiti shantarajasam brahma bhutam akalmasham. The dot under an S, that's what I forgot. That is a white noise S sound, sh instead of sh. And if you see an S without a dot or an accent mark, then that will be just a regular S sound. I want to highlight this line, the second line, yoginam sukham uttamam. So for the yogi, one experiences not just sukham. So sukha, like sukha means sweetness. As in sukhino bhavantu, a popular phrase in many yoga classes, involves this phrase, sukhino bhavantu. So bhava means spiritual emotion. So the sweetness of spiritual emotions there. And this same kind of sweetness is implied here, but uttamam, uta means, anything with ut in it means intense, ultimate, uttamam. So ultimate happiness, supreme happiness is experienced by the yogi. How? By Brahma Bhutam. So Brahma Bhutam means liberation by identifying with the Supreme. So here, liberation by union with the Supreme is indicated by this phrase. Now, Brahma Bhutam is sometimes interpreted as meaning realizing that one is Brahman. And that is true. Brahman is the spiritual stuff of which all things are made. And therefore, it is the spiritual stuff of which we are also made. So in that sense, that is entirely true. Leaving it there is a little incomplete, and assuming that that's all there is Brahman, and we are Brahman, is not, as far as I am concerned, the understanding that Krishna is directing us toward in the Bhagavad-gita. Many translations indicate that that is precisely what Krishna is going for. And as we progress through the rest of this session, I'll explain why I'm not so convinced that that's actually the case. Here's where we find the two kinds of oneness. So Patanjali gives us three ways to understand whether or not we actually know something, epistemology. Direct perception, logic, and verbal testimony, otherwise known as scripture. What do the sages have to say? What are the recorded teachings have to say about something? Let's look at our translation. A yogi whose mind is peaceful will surely achieve liberation by union with the Supreme, and will thus attain the highest perfection of transcendental happiness. Situated beyond the influence of passion, one is thus he is, pick your choose, freed from all reactions to past deeds. Okay, we'll come back. All right, so let's hang with this for just a moment. If we are to explore the proposition that Brahma Bhutam means liberation into the oneness of Brahman, as opposed to union with the Supreme, that is to say, a relationship with the Supreme, then we have to consider what kind of oneness are we talking about? What do we mean when we say we are one? In a sense, a wedded couple becomes one when they get married. They're still two distinct people, and yet there's a unity now that that is their marriage. A relationship. a way of being together that is categorically different from when they weren't married. That's what makes marriage special, I suppose. But it doesn't mean they lose their identity and become literally one. There's a qualitative oneness, a oneness of spirit, a unity insofar as they are joined together by their devotion to one another. But qualitatively, they're different. Rather quantitatively, I should say. They are different. Each is a quanta of personness unto themselves. So we can think about Atma as the individual soul and Paramatma, Atma as the supreme soul, in a similar way. What I think Krishna is speaking about here is qualitative oneness, which is to say, we realize our true spiritual nature. And we also understand that we share this same spiritual nature with the Paramatma, the supreme person, who is also pure spirit. The difference is that we can fall under the influence of illusion, and the Paramatma is not going to fall under the influence of illusion, because that illusory energy is an emanation from the Paramatma. That is to say, the Paramatma is the source of everything, including the illusory energy that bewilders us and has us fall into a state of forgetfulness of our own true spiritual nature. Upon remembering our true spiritual nature, we also remember that we are made of the same spiritual stuff of the supreme person of whom we are a part. And that's the qualitative difference. We are a part of the complete absolute reality that is the Paramatma, whereas the Paramatma is the sum total and then some. So it's the difference between an infinitesimal part and an infinite whole. Qualitatively, the same in terms of spiritual, and qualitatively one in a sense of unity of relationship, as opposed to quantitatively different. We are very small, the Supreme Person is very big, we are a part, the Supreme Person is the whole. So that's the distinction. Those are the two kinds of oneness: qualitative oneness and quantitative oneness, which allow for us to be simultaneously one and yet different at the same time. Do you have any questions about this? And in particular, if you are curious about the idea of absolute oneness, and whether or not literal absolute oneness as an ultimate state of self-realization conforms or is corroborated by our direct perception, is logical, or is substantiated by verbal testimony of previous sages in Yoga Wisdom texts, please go ahead and pop a question into the Q&A box. I will keep my eyes out for your questions. And as I do that, I will move on to the next verse. So in the next cluster of verses, verses 28 through 32, Krishna is going to explain how the perfection of yoga is found in the realization of Paramatma, of being actually able to experience, see directly with spiritually awakened vision, the Supreme Person within the heart of the individual and within the heart of all individuals. So here we go. So here's 28 again. By constant engagement in the practice of yoga, the self remains connected to the Supreme Self, becomes free from all material impurities, and easily attains infinite joy. So here we see that self-realization means knowing one's constitutional position in relationship to the Supreme as an individual part of the Supreme, as I said before, an infinitesimal part of an infinite complete whole. Remember, yoga means union. Yuj is the root word of yoga. It means to yoke or connect together by some dynamic force so that two become as one. Not necessarily literally one, but two become as one by virtue of this connection. Therefore, connected to the Supreme Self through the practice of yoga. So again, the word Brahma shows up in this verse, this time as Brahma Samsparsha. And that means transcendental contact with the Supreme. So a little different from Brahma Bhutam, but it amplifies or further explains the same idea, kind of extends this idea. Text 29. An adept yogi sees the Supreme Self within all beings and sees all beings within the Supreme Self. Indeed, one who is truly linked to the Supreme by the process of yoga sees the same Supreme Self everywhere. So this is another kind of equal vision. Samadarshana is the phrase that is used, the Sanskrit phrase. We saw this same phrase as seeing equally in the 5th chapter, when Krishna describes the equal vision of a yogi whose action is informed by transcendental knowledge. Now here's the thing. What Krishna is describing here is the actual vision of an adept yogi, not an intellectual understanding or an abstract idea. This description is meant to be taken literally, which is to say one literally sees the Supreme Person within one's own heart and the hearts of all living beings when one's spiritual senses are fully awakened by this process of yoga that Krishna is describing. That's pretty far out. The idea that one can actually see the Supreme Being. This kind of seeing is categorically different from the kind of seeing we do with our material eyeballs in the mundane world. And often people will ask this question, well, if God exists, how come I can't see God? He's supposed to be everywhere. And I think it's reasonable to respond by asking, well, do you actually have the eyes to see this Supreme Being? That's one way to think about it. Are your eyes capable of accessing that vision? Do they have the necessary bandwidth? Yoga is about expanding one's consciousness. If there's something missing in our vision, then it means there's something missing in our consciousness. If our vision is in somehow or other spiritually defective, that's an indication that our consciousness has a spiritual defect that can be rectified by the practice of yoga. Here's another way to look at this same question. Let's just say, if I wanted to see Richard Branson is the head of Virgin Airways and Virgin everything else, and he's rich, he's famous, he's important, he's got things to do, places to go, people to see? Why would he want to see me? Why would anyone around him let me see him? I can't actually think of a good reason. But if he wanted to see me, it would probably be a lot easier for him to arrange to see me, and in the process for me to see him, than it would be just for me to try to get an appointment to see him. So similarly, when a person takes up the practice of yoga with dedication and determination, with the intention of developing transcendental vision, that's an activity that might, in fact, probably will, attract the attention of the person you're trying to see. So if we act in such a way so that the Paramatma wants to see us, well, then seeing the Paramatma will be automatic. In fact, let's flip all the way back to the previous verse. The verse that we started with when we look back to last week's session. One must certainly withdraw the mind from wherever it wanders due to its flickering and unsteady nature and bring it back under the control of the self. Well, once again, let's ask, which self are we talking about? Are we talking about me? By my own endeavor, I'm going to control the mind? Or am I going to make my mind an offering to the Supreme Self? Remember, the mind is matter, subtle matter, metaphysical matter, but it's still in the category of matter. And matter is an energy of the Supreme Person. Therefore, if I think of my mind as a form of energy that I can offer to the source of that energy and say, hey, how about this? You control my mind for me. It's your energy. I'm just bewildered by it. It's beyond my control. The fact that I can't control it is proof that I'm not the controller. You're the controller. Ishvara means controller. How about this? How about you, Ishvara, control my mind for me, so that I will be purified enough that I can see you. So in this sense, we can think of that verse as indicating the yogi should control the mind, or the yogi can offer up the mind to Ishvara and ask Ishvara to be the one who controls the mind. This is part of the point of meditating on Ishvara. Ishvara is a person, and it's human nature, it's person nature, that when someone asks for help, the person who is asked is kind of spontaneously inclined to provide that help. We like being helpful. It feels good to be helpful. Where does that come from? Where does everything come from? If it's within us, then it also comes from the source of our being. It must be present within the source of our being, because you cannot give what you do not have. So if we have an inclination to be helpful, then I think there's a pretty good chance that Ishvara, the Supreme Person, also has an inclination to be helpful. And especially when the whole point of controlling the mind is to develop a relationship with Ishvara, and Ishvara, we assume, quite reasonably, is favorably inclined towards rekindling that relationship, then naturally Ishvara will be helpful. So there's another way to think about that. So, truly linked to the Supreme by the process of yoga, one sees the same Supreme Self everywhere. So this is equal vision in two parts: seeing all beings as spiritually equal, that's qualitative oneness, and seeing the Supreme Self in all beings and all creation within the one Supreme Self. That's quantitative difference, once again. I want to quickly compare the translation I just read to you with a different translation. This is the Penguin Classics edition of the Bhagavad-gita, translated by Juan Mascaro. And he translates text 29 very differently. He, the yogi, sees himself in the heart of all beings, and he sees all beings in his heart. This is the vision of the yogi of harmony, a vision which is ever one. You may have noticed a completely different conclusion in this translation. The idea that we see ourselves within our own hearts, ourselves within the hearts of other beings. Now, perhaps he means that literally. Or, as we'll see in upcoming verses, perhaps this is an ode to empathy. We'll see. But I would like to point out that I don't think that, from a literal standpoint, makes very much sense. Because right now we are experiencing illusion, and the person who is us is subject to illusion, and the person he's referring to that we see in our hearts is not subject to illusion. So the whole thing just feels a little schizophrenic to me. Let me know how you think about it. All right. We're going to chant the next verse together. Oop. There we go. So once again, yeah, this is special. Chanting 2 verses, not just 1. Once again, I will chant 1 line, you chant the line back, and we will go through the entire verse. Here we go. Yo mam pashyati sarvatra sarvam cha mayi pashyati tasyaham na pranashyami sa cha me na pranashyati. Here are the key words in this verse: mam, mayi, aham, and me. Why? Because mam means me, mayi means in me, aham means I, and me means to me. A lot of I and me here. Here's the translation: for one who sees me everywhere and sees everything in me. I am never lost, nor are they ever lost to me. Now, this is pretty far out, and here's why. Krishna has just pivoted from describing Paramatma as if the Paramatma or Ishvara was someone else in the third person, to now equating himself with that very same Paramatma. He is revealing himself as Ishvara, the ultimate object of meditation. So this is going to happen in the Gita more and more. We will notice this as a trend, that Krishna will speak of Brahman in a kind of impersonal sense, Paramatma as a third person, and then himself in the first person, equating himself as the foundation, the basis of Brahman, the source of the effulgence, the light of spiritual energy of which all things are made, and as being that localized aspect of the absolute truth that resides within the heart of all beings. This is one of the trickier understandings of the Bhagavad-gita. Krishna referring to two out of the three aspects of the absolute truth, and then indicating that those two, Brahman and Paramatma, are included in him as Bhagavan. Remember, when Krishna speaks, he says, Shri Bhagavan, the phrase that precedes his speech is Shri Bhagavan Uvacha. And there are three aspects of the absolute truth: Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. So Paramatma includes Brahman realization, and Bhagavan realization, the realization of Krishna in his personal form, includes both Paramatma and Brahman. So here Krishna is directly saying, I am that person who is residing within your heart. Once again, I want to compare with another translation. This is a translation by Eknath Easwaran. And this now is text 30. His translation reads, I am ever present to those who have realized me in every creature. Seeing all life as my manifestation, they are never separated from me. So this is another way of saying the same thing, that all life is a manifestation of the Supreme Person who Krishna identifies as being himself. There is a danger here, however, of misinterpretation. Seeing all life as my manifestation does not mean that everything is the Supreme Being. So, for example, if we go for a walk in the woods and we walk by a pond and we hear a frog croaking. So the frog is a manifestation of the Supreme Being. The frog's body is made of the same transformed energy made of matter. The person in the frog body is a spiritual person in a frog body, and the Supreme Person is within the heart of the person in the frog body. But the frog is not the Supreme Being, because there is a difference between being a manifestation of the Supreme Being and being the Supreme Being. And I think that that is a place where sometimes we get tripped up, where we think, yes, the frog is the Supreme Being, and the turtle is the Supreme Being, and the swan is the Supreme Being, and the tree is the Supreme Being. Each one of them is the Supreme Being. And that is not quite what I believe the correct understanding is. They are all manifestations of the Supreme Being. Infinitesimal parts of the infinite complete whole, the same as we are infinitesimal parts of an infinite complete whole. But each one of them is not the Supreme Being individually, any more than the steering wheel in my car is the complete car. Okay. Again, if you have any questions or comments, I'm looking forward to seeing them pop up in the Q&A box, so please do not hesitate. We'll move on to the last two verses for this evening. This is now text 31. One who is immersed in this experience of unity offers their love to me as the one who abides in all beings. So this clearly indicates that this is not an absolute literal oneness, because absolute literal oneness precludes the offering of love from one to another. For an offering of love to be there, there has to be this one who is offering love, the one who is receiving love, and love itself. So you need three things for that to happen. So clearly, this is not an example of absolute undifferentiated unity. There is still the individual Atma, the Paramatma, And now, a definition of the relationship, namely a relationship of love. And when our practice of yoga brings us to the point of feelings of love for that person whom we see in the hearts of all beings and in our own heart, then such a transcendentalist lives within me, irrespective of any external circumstances. So it's an internal experience. One actually leads kind of a double life, a life of having a relationship of love going on with the Supreme Person within one's heart, and then dealing with whatever it is that's going on in your life. All right, comment or question, here we go. So, if the contents of our mind reflects aspects of the mind of God, does that include the negative aspects of our mind or only the good? This is a great question. So both good and bad aspects of our mind are composed of the energy of the Supreme. Our mind reflects the aspects of the mind of God when there is this sense of unity. Let's say unity of purpose, a relationship of love. Then the mind, which has now become spiritualized by virtue of yoga practice, reflects aspects of the mind of God. Whereas the mind that we are currently trying to control and all of the thoughts and feelings therein that are not engaged in the process of yoga or focused on meditation, on Ishvara, that isn't so much a reflection of the aspect of the mind of God as it is a manifestation of the illusory energy that is emanating from the Supreme Person. And our task is to overcome the influence of this illusory energy. We will hear a little bit later on a very specific description of this. Daivi hyesha gunamayi mama maya duratyaya. This divine energy of mine, Daivi, divine, hyesha gunamayi, mayi, again, mine. Guna, the three qualities of material nature. These three qualities of material nature are very difficult to overcome, but one who surrenders, who takes shelter of me, can easily cross beyond it. So to the extent that we desire that our mind reflects the mind of God, that's what taking shelter means. That's what surrender of our own obstinate ego to, when we sacrifice our false ego for the sake of becoming an instrument of divine will, that's what opens us up to the possibility, to the potential for having our own minds reflect the mind of God. And that's a little different from the mind that we wrestle with thoughts that are, relatively speaking, good or bad or indifferent or what have you. So I hope that's clear. We have the mind made of the qualities of material nature that are relative and are relatively good or relatively bad, and that's an energy of the Supreme. And then we have the reflection of the mind of the Supreme when we offer the mind to the Supreme Person for the sake of dovetailing our own will with the will of the Supreme. Shanna, does that make sense, or does that answer your question? Please let me know in the Q&A box. All right, and now we have follow-up. So do the negative aspects come from ourselves, or are they part of another energy like the devil? So the negative aspects are a collaborative affair. The Bhagavad-gita does not posit a devil or a Satan per se. But it does say that the mind left uncontrolled will be our worst enemy and will drag us to hell. The gates to hell are lust, anger, and greed. When unconstrained desire for material enjoyment, anger at not being able to enjoy the way we would like, and the hoarding mentality of wanting stuff for ourselves at the expense of others. When those three things are there, then we become our own worst enemy. And the mind that feeds that fire becomes our own worst enemy. And those negative aspects originate in our own desire to occupy the position of the supreme person, envy of the position of the supreme person, and animosity towards the one person who is actually qualified to hold that position. So in that sense, yes, the negative aspects are on us. And the energy that interacts with those desires is are the qualities of material nature that delude the mind and allow the mind to drag us off into the illusion that we can occupy that position. So does that help? Please let me know if that's clear. And if you have another follow-up question, I will try to answer that as well. Let's head into the home stretch here. The last verse for this evening, revisited. Oh. Okay, you're welcome. O Arjuna, a perfect yogi is one who, in seeing the true equality of all beings, sees the happiness and distress of all beings as if it were their own. So here is where this empathy, seeing oneself in all beings, kicks in this verse. The ultimate cause of any distress that we are in or that we see someone else in is forgetfulness of our actual true spiritual nature. Forgetfulness of this relationship of love that is waiting to be activated between ourselves, the Atma, and the supreme person, the Paramatma. So one's relationship with Krishna, who has identified himself as the Paramatma, is the activation of that relationship is the source of our ultimate happiness. Here, remember, the yogi who has reached this perfection easily attains limitless, boundless joy, infinite joy. So someone who is on the path of yoga is naturally empathetic with all beings, feels their pain, feels their happiness, feels a desire for them to experience the same kind of happiness that is available to them, just as it is available to the yogi. And therefore, a yogi is a friend to everyone. And as is appropriate according to time, place, and circumstance, is anxious to share their experience of yoga with everyone and to offer the experience of yoga in any circumstance where they are qualified to offer that experience. And that takes us to the end of our cluster of verses for this evening. So we've covered the two kinds of oneness and the characteristics of spiritual vision, taking it a step further from karma yoga in Ashtanga-yoga, the idea of literally being able to see the supreme being within the heart of all beings, including oneself. We covered verses 27 through 32. If you have any questions after the fact, as we head into closing time, please write to me, Hari at Hari-kirtana.com. I look forward to your questions. And if you are going to be, if you are anywhere near Frederick, Maryland this weekend, I will be doing a 4-part Bhagavad-gita weekend immersion, Saturday and Sunday, 4 parts, morning session, afternoon session, with a break for lunch in the middle. Please join me for that. Coming up soon, I will be out in McLean, Virginia at Satsang-yoga for another 2-part weekend on Saturday, integrating yoga philosophy into classes and workshops. This is a special day-long or afternoon workshop, rather, for yoga teachers who are interested in integrating themes, philosophical themes, into classes and workshops. Please join me for that. And then for teachers and practitioners alike, Flowing with the Phenomenal will be a class, an asana class, that extended asana class that has a philosophical theme directly embedded in it. So if you're a teacher, you get the theory, and then you get the example of the theory the next day on Sunday. If you're a practitioner, come on Sunday and have a very, very nice philosophically driven asana class. Last call for Awaken Your Spiritual Vision. Go to my website if you have not already done so and sign up and download my free 45-minute audio training, because it may not be there all that much longer. And just in case you do not already have a copy, my book, Surprise, is still available on Amazon, also via IndieBound, if you would like to support your local bookstore. Now, if you already have my book and you have read my book, or at least read enough of it that you qualify, please go to Amazon and or Goodreads and post a review. I'd really, really appreciate it. Reviews really do make a difference. The more you have, the more better it is. And so if you would be so kind, I'd really appreciate if you would write a review of my book if you've read it. Next week, we'll be back with heading into the home stretch of Chapter 6, the Yoga of Eightfold Mysticism. Arjuna has doubts. Surprise, surprise. We are still in that part of the Bhagavad-gita where Arjuna is not fully convinced. And in this case, he's not fully convinced that he can do the kind of yoga that Krishna is describing. So he expresses his doubts about the path of yogic meditation. Krishna will reply with advice as to how one overcomes obstacles to controlling the mind. We will also review some keys to controlling the mind. And as Arjuna is doubtful of his ability to pull this off, we will look at the destination of the unsuccessful yogi, or the yogi who has not completed the path of Ashtanga-yoga within a single lifetime. What happens if you're working on it and you run out of time? We'll find out in verses 33 through 45, and that will be next Thursday. And that's what I got for you this evening. Thank you very, very much for spending your time with me. I deeply appreciate the fact that you have done this, and I look forward to doing it again next Thursday night. Have a nice night.